Hi, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Community Engagement Institute Spring 2024 Rising to the Challenge workshop series. Today's workshop is being recorded, and we will post this on our YouTube channel later in case you want to go back and revisit it or share it with folks who couldn't make it today. If we haven't met before, my name is Zane May. I work for the Center for Organizational Development at CEI. And if you're interested in learning more about our work, we invite you to check out our website and also reach out to either Carri or myself or anyone at the Institute to start a conversation. And we'd love to meet you and get to know about the work that you do. I'm joined today by my colleague, Carri McMahon, who's going to lead us through our fourth workshop in this series. Today, Carri is going to talk to us about the worst practices in team performance, and it's a presentation that I'm really looking forward to. This 5-part workshop series is focused on enhancing teamwork and our ability to collaborate with others. If you have any technical issues during the meeting today, please feel free to send me a message in chat, or I'll put my email in chat and you can send me an email. And we only have an hour together here today, so I want to make sure that we use as much time as possible to give our presenter time to get through the material. So I'm going to hand it over to Carri.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you're all here. I'm going to start my screen share, so give me just a second because Zoom always rearranges my windows for me when I start sharing my screen, which is very unhelpful sometimes. So I'm really glad that you decided to join us today for what is intended to be a humorous look at team performance, which is a very serious issue. I'm hoping we can have a little bit of fun talking about worst practices instead of what we all hear all the time, which is the best practices. And it stands to reason that if we talk about worst practices, best practices are probably going to be the flip side of those. So we'll talk about those a little bit as well. So to tell you a little about what to expect today, we'll start off with the introduction, which we are almost through. So good job. We can almost cross the first thing off of our list. We'll review 4 different worst practices or characteristics in teams. To do that, we'll have an overview of what I mean when I talk about that practice, how I'm defining it. We'll have some examples and stories from pop culture, and also stories are from the Ask a Manager advice column, which I highly recommend. There are great real stories, real great advice, and then also some what on earth stories. And then also we'll talk about maybe what to do instead. And then we'll wrap it up, bringing everything together. And I will invite you at times throughout the presentation to share in the chat your ideas and reactions. So please do that at any time, but especially when I prompt you, it'll be much more fun if it's not just me the whole hour. If we haven't met before, my name is Carri. As Zane said, we work together at the Community Engagement Institute. I spend most of my work days in the realm of supporting organizations to utilize their capacity in what they know in their future planning. Outside of work, one of my all-time favorite things to do is foster animals for my local humane society. And you can see here one of the puppies from the very first litter that I fostered a couple of years ago. So it would not be a great workshop if we didn't have an icebreaker and get to know each other a little bit. So first off, I would like to hear your opinions on icebreakers. Do you love them? Do you hate them? And I'm going to start a poll for you to respond. So that should have popped up on your screen, whether you love them or hate them. If you hate them, I apologize now. And you can feel free to abstain from the question I'm about to ask. So So thank you for that. We are right now, at least a slight majority like them or love them. So thank you for that. And that support. And my question for you, share in the chat if you're willing, is what is your most memorable icebreaker question you have been asked? So what pops into your head, whether you liked it, didn't like it, what was the most memorable icebreaker question? Poll has slowed down, so I'm going to go ahead and turn that off and you can see the results. And some of our icebreakers out there, absolutely true. And that is a little bit perfect segue. As you're sharing your most memorable questions, in my mind, whenever I think of icebreakers, I usually go to a question. And heard recently, again, from the Ask the Manager blog, we relied heavily on that today. They asked for icebreakers, and one that was shared was the mid-year meeting we had last week started with a skipping competition. Yes, we had to skip across the room and were judged on how well we skipped. The person who won did a TikTok skip that I knew nothing about. So that would be a little bit out of my comfort zone as somebody who's very much an introvert and does not want to skip in front of my colleagues for the most part. So thank you for indulging. If you think of a question of an icebreaker that you have been asked, feel free to share it. And we'll go ahead and dive into our content today. As we prepare to do that, I do want to remind or give a quick disclaimer that I'm going to share some stories today. Again, these are all public stories that are from an advice column available on the internet. These are not my real world stories. I do not know the people involved. I am not the person involved. And throughout today, again, we're talking about, the worst practices and kind of negative themes, and this is intended to be lighthearted. So at no point am I asking you to call out yourself or others for things that they do or their bad habits. So again, we want this to be fun and lighthearted. So how do you ensure mutual destruction, or at least a pretty miserable work experience and poor performance on a team? There are about 4 key characteristics among teams that are performing poorly, those being distrust, which can look like doubt, skepticism, not being able to rely or feeling like you can rely on your peers. Next is poor communication, keeping information, gatekeeping, or telling too late, telling or over communicating in an unhealthy way, telling other people's business, and using information as power is one of the ways that you see that show up a lot. Next is ambiguity, things being really vague, not knowing what to expect, or having different standards from one day to the next or one person to the next. And then finally, silos. So lots of barriers between projects, between teams, between products, any of those things where people don't know what each other are doing necessarily, to the point that that's prohibitive. And while supervisors and leadership aren't solely responsible for these characters on teams, or solely the people responsible for them, they do show up a lot here because by nature, people in leadership positions or who have authority have a lot of power and influence to set the tone and culture for team. So that trickles down from what leadership is doing. And they're the ones who can create change or impact change. So that's going to show up a lot as we go through today. When we talk about team performance, this is the definition that I'm using, and that is team performance is the extent to which a team can achieve its goals and objectives, as well as the quality and quantity of its outputs and outcomes. So how well they get their work done, and then the quality and quantity of that work. So not only how much are you getting done, but is it good? Is it efficient? Is it useful? So that's where my headspace is when we talk about these things. So the first characteristic to dive in of a poor performing team is distrust. And distrust is really, really closely tied to relationships on teams. So we'll kind of talk about both of those things here. On these teams, people are very suspicious of one another. They don't trust your intentions or your motives. They don't think that you're going to do a good job. Assume that you don't know what you're doing, or assuming that I know everything, and I just can't rely on you to do what I need you to do. Also, often don't see each other as actual people. So you're just kind of a cog in the machine. Staff don't know what to expect day to day. Relationships are very much transactional and can often feel dehumanized. So another flip side of that is that those relationships at work could also be overly familiar and overly friendly, to where there's favoritism. So that erodes trust because one person's getting preferential treatment, or they are just really overly friendly, and that makes it really uncomfortable to give each other feedback, to ask questions, or challenge each other in your work to make sure that everybody's got the same understanding. And sometimes that can show up in cultures where people are saying we're like family here, which that can get to a really unhealthy place in employee relationships and building trust. Because if I fully trust you, then I should be able to also tell you if I don't agree with decisions that are happening or the way you're doing things. A really great example from this, if you've seen the movie Office Space, Bill Lumbergh does a really great job of dehumanizing his employees and his staff, micromanaging what they're doing, but and not trusting them, and so kind of overlooking what they're doing and being very authoritarian. He likes to remind you that he's the boss. Other characteristics that you could see in these types of situations are, again, bosses who are condescending and talk down to staff. So staff don't feel like they're capable. They don't feel trusted. Not taking feedback from each other. Supervisors not taking feedback from staff. Being very authoritarian because they won't listen to staff, and they're the boss, so they make the decisions. And again, viewing employees as machines versus people. And a story time about this kind of distrust. So this is our first story, a little bit of context. I'll put a link to the full story into the chat. But again, this comes from the Ask a Manager blog, and the letter writer in these cases is the person who wrote it. So they're presented pretty generically because a lot of times they don't tell us a lot about themselves. So in this case, our letter writer says, I manage a team, and a part of their jobs is to provide customer support over the phone. Due to a new product launch, we are expected to provide service outside our normal hours for a time. This includes some of my team coming in on a day our office is normally closed, based on lowest seniority because no one volunteered. One employee asked to come in 2 hours after the start time because she was graduating from college. And her ceremony was that day. She'd been taking night classes and part-time to earn her degree. I wasn't able to grant her request because she was the employee with the lowest seniority, and we needed coverage for that day. I said if she could find someone to replace her for those 2 hours, she could start late. She asked coworkers, but no one was willing to come in on their day off. After she asked around, some people who were not scheduled for the overtime did switch shifts with other people, but not with her, and volunteered to take overtime from others who were scheduled. These people are friends outside of work, and as long as there's coverage, I don't interfere with people who want to give or take overtime of their own accord. I did intervene and switch one person's end time because they had concert tickets that they had already paid for, but that was a special circumstance because there was cost involved. I told this team member that she could not start 2 hours late and she would have to skip the ceremony. An hour later, she handed me her work ID and a list of all the times she had covered for others. And then she quit on the spot she quit on the spot. I'm a little bit upset because she was my best employee by far. Her work was excellent. She never missed a day of work in the 6 years she worked here, was my go-to person, et cetera, et cetera. Even though she doesn't work here anymore, I want to reach out and tell her that quitting without notice because she didn't get her way isn't professional. I only want to do this because she was otherwise a great employee and I don't want her to derail her career. See the chat, good for her, yes. And again, this is an extreme story, but as it's intended to be. But what are some less extreme ways that I see lots of advice? Yes, I believe you're all right. What are some less extreme ways that this kind of distrust and relationships can show up in the workplace? Micromanagement, thank you. Changing things after they're discussed. Lots of feedback about how you would have handled it, even covering it yourself, which, yes, there are certainly instances where that would be appropriate or beneficial. Unwilling to do their job, a supervisor unwilling to do their job and get coverage for you. The supervisor didn't offer to help her use her authority. Absolutely. Rigid fixation on rules just for power's sake. See that in the chat. Thank you. Yeah, for sure. All right. And so again, best practice or flip side of this, so things that you see on high performing teams and teams that work together well, there's a high degree of trust and mutual respect. They all know that they're there for the same reason. They all know that they are good at their jobs, they're good at what they do. There is some grace for mistakes. They support each other. They're able to work independently. They don't have somebody looking over their shoulder all of the time, a supervisor looking over their shoulder, making sure that it's done correctly, because their supervisors trust and know that they've hired good people who are going to do good work for them. They have a high degree of psychological safety. So that you can challenge one another. That if you mess up, then your coworkers and your supervisor have your back. So you're able to mess up and know that you're not going to have extreme consequences. How about those best practices? How have you seen that done well in your world or in your work? Thanks, Guy. I'm afraid to share ideas or push back if we disagree. Having one-on-ones with supervisor, remembering staff is learning and giving them grace to do so. Very good. Thank you for sharing those. And feel free to continue sharing. Our next topic, allowing experimentation, I love that, is poor communication. And this is on the team, folks are gatekeeping information or using it as power, sharing it on a need-to-know basis, or messages are inconsistent. You don't get all of the details. You don't know necessarily what each other are doing because you're not talking about it. And issues on the team that arise are ignored, they're dealt with technical solutions, or they're passed on to others. So those things are not being addressed and resolved. They're just either being ignored or pushed off. Our example with this one is Miranda Priestley and her team at Runway Magazine in the movie The Devil Wears Prada. If you're familiar, in this movie, every person is working and looking out for themselves. There is no shared joy, shared success. It's every person for themselves. As a supervisor, Miranda does not give directions or instructions. She gives commands, and you're expected to do it. And then if you get it wrong, you are punished or penalized, but there's no guidance to help make sure you're getting it right. Most communication with her is done through fear and intimidation. So in other cases, similarly, bosses are using that information as power, blaming you unnecessarily if you're getting it wrong, not giving you information or explanation. So they might tell you what a decision is, but they don't explain any rationale behind it to help you understand why they got there, or even better, get your input before decisions are made when that's possible. And Miranda Priestley bossed more than once. I am very sorry to hear that. So our story for communication here is, I have a question for you about, and again, this is from the letter writer, about a scenario that happened several years ago, but still haunts me. I work in a medical setting and under a new manager, Jane, and a relatively well-established director, John, who has a reputation for pushing shortcomings off onto other individuals. There had been friction between Jane and another employee, and during a one-on-one meeting with John over another issue, I was asked how I would have handled it. I don't know why, since I had no management background myself at the time. Since the issue seemed to be related to a misunderstanding or different communication styles, I recommended a facilitated conversation between Jane and the employee, with John being the facilitator. I've carried a lot of guilt around about that recommendation. It seemed very reasonable at the time. The next day, all staff, 10 of us, were instructed to proceed to a conference room. Excuse me. The chairs were arranged in a circle and Jane was placed in the middle. We were then required to go around the circle one at a time and list our grievances with Jane's management style. She could not defend her decisions. None of this seemed to be related to the original dispute. And in fact, one employee who experienced friction with Jane, the employee who had experienced friction with Jane was allowed to skip this experience because it would be too stressful for her. Excuse me. My screen scrolled on me. It would be too stressful for her, according to John. Several of us during our turn attempted to sway the conversation away from negative talk and talk about things Jane was doing well. We were told that positive reinforcement wasn't the point of this meeting, and we needed to follow instructions. Somewhat unsurprisingly, Jane put in her notice about 30 minutes after this concluded. She still works for the organization in a different role, and I've had the opportunity to apologize about what happened. She and I remain on friendly terms, but I can't help but wonder if there's anything I could have done or said differently in the moment, and I can't think of any better perspective on this than yours. I did share the link to that in the chat, sharing it for all of these stories, but I do want to note, I'm not sharing the responses or advice given in most cases, but this letter writer was reassured that this was not her fault or their faults for what happened. They did not do anything to encourage this to happen. I can't believe these situations are real. I agree with you, Kristen. I see your note in the chat. They are, again, very extreme examples of what these things can look like. Right. So related to communication, again, bad in low performing teams, that's often gatekeeping. Information is power, or overreaction to situations. And John didn't take her advice in the spirit it was given. Yeah, he used it as an opportunity to stage a group attack. I agree. That is really, really vicious, it seems. So we've talked about some ways that ways this can look. Are there other ways that this could, less extreme ways that this can show up in teams and poor communication, the impact of poor communication? I apologize. I was on the wrong window. Divide a team against, use a team against itself, divide and control. Yeah. Some triangulation happening. Not being given any type of warning, skipping to punishment. Yeah, implication, absolutely poor performance. Yeah, for sure. And going back, Alicia, you said that not being given warning and going straight to a punishment is something that you see. It's very technical to be like, okay, you're doing this wrong without that benefit of or support of how to resolve it or how to improve, and going just straight to the penalty. Viewing one set of people as part of the team and others have the same, and others of the same peer level is not a part of the team, right? Going back to those relationships and kind of using people against each other. In high performing teams, what you see is really leaning towards over communication and transparency. These teams want to make sure that everybody has all of the information, whether that is about a project, whether that is about, I'm going to be on vacation and I need to make sure it's covered, or I will cover for you because I know you're going out and making those offers. you know, they will err towards sharing more information in order to make sure that everybody understands what's happening, has the information that they need to be successful and get their jobs done well. And then also are extremely responsive to one another. So both with responsive in the sense of time, so responding promptly, thoroughly, but also responding supportively. So whether that is helping with completing a task somebody might not know, or giving feedback in a way that is effective. Are there ways that you've seen this work well, or great practices you've seen or used? If you have a great practice or think that you can think of, then I really invite you to share those things as well. I would love to hear how great you do it. I don't doubt you do. While you're thinking and typing, I'm going to keep us going. Our third area of, or third characteristic of a badly performing team is ambiguity. So these teams, there's very little direction. It's very scattered. Nobody really seems to know what they're doing. So efforts are duplicated or things aren't getting done. You're dropping balls left and right. Even if you know what you're doing and like, you know your job very, very well, you might not understand the big picture of how that fits into the rest of the work that you're doing, or the company and as a whole. So you might know your world, but not the bigger picture and how you're helping influence the company as a whole or the organization. So there also can be some headbutting because you don't know who's responsible for what. Things get really inefficient because either nobody's doing the thing or everybody's doing the thing. In a supervisory capacity, my favorite example, Michael Scott from The Office. You never know day to day what to expect. There aren't any expectations placed on you, so you don't know if you're doing a good job or not. Instructions are really vague. Things change direction without warning or explanation. And you feel like you can't get things done. Teams feel like they can't really get to the goals that they're working on because there's not that structure there for them. And they keep getting different directions and things change without warning. And one of the ways that ambiguity shows up is a lack of policy or unreasonable policy. And so in this example, I'm actually going to share some ridiculous policies that folks have had in their workplace. So first up is called the notepads. I had a boss who insisted that only her notes could be on yellow legal pads, and her sales staff all had to take notes on white paper of letter size. She insisted that whenever we ordered new pads of paper, we order equal amounts for her. This naturally resulted in us having an insane amount of unused yellow legal pads, since 6 salespeople use way more paper than one boss. The person who trained me rolled his eyes when he explained the rule, and then opened a desk drawer to show a whole stack of yellow legal pads. He told me to make sure to save space in my desk for them because the boss regularly ran out of room and stashed them in employees' desks. But under no circumstances ever use that paper. If I accidentally did, he said to sneak the whole pad out of the office because the boss would lose it if she saw a missing page or a sheet of yellow paper in the trash can. Spacing. I worked at a small museum about a decade ago. Management's MO was that any incident had to have a new rule made. At one point, we were told that while in the galleries, we had to stand 2 arms lengths apart and measure that distance every time another employee came into the room. Sign-ins. We had to sign in upon arrival or be counted as late, but the logbook was in our boss's office and she was always late. We had to hang around her door until she showed up. Instead of getting a jump on the day's work, we were salaried teachers, so we'd always arrive early. If we showed up before the boss and just started working, we would be counted late. The books. I worked for a publishing company that published a variety of print media. One of the senior managers in the books team created a rule that marketing material could not use the word book or books. So we had to promote books without saying they were books. And finally, the comp time. I had a salaried position where you would get comp time if you came in on time and stayed late, but not if you came in early and left at your usual time. It didn't matter what your shift was. It worked out great for people who worked from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. and were quarterly asked to stay until 6. Not great for me and others who regularly worked 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. and were quarterly asked to come in at 8 a.m. and stay until our usual 6 p.m. end time. At the end of the day, we'd all worked 10 hours, but the policy only compensated those who stayed late. So, rules for the sake of rules is kind of a common theme here. And also with these, it feels a lot like those technical solutions to problems. So instead of using good communication and talking about issues and resolving them, these things, there's a policy made or a rule made. And in some cases, it's people being people and a little bit ridiculous, and you can't use my paper because I need my own, or whatever the case may be. I can't explain that one, but it definitely falls under the category of ridiculous. But oftentimes these kinds of things are implemented as a result. Power trip is a really good way of phrasing that. A lot of times these things are implemented as a result of again, a technical solution to a problem. Like the one person had said, if they, that any incident, there had to be a rule created. So you can't just address a problem or talk about it and let it go. You have to create something so that it doesn't happen again, and expecting essentially perfection through rules, and that perfection through rules and policy is not going to happen. Great work comes from clear expectations and everybody being held accountable to the same standards, as opposed to creating a rule or writing down something that people need to change or do better in. And in higher performing teams, the way that what you see is clear roles and responsibilities. Everybody knows their lane and knows what they're supposed to be doing. They understand what each other are doing, so they're not stepping on each other's toes unnecessarily. They understand how the work that they're doing impacts others within their organization and how it's contributing to the larger mission. Not everything, but things are generally communicated clearly, not changed on a whim or without any kind of warning, discussion, explanation. So it's clear what we do, why we do it, how we do it, how it contributes to the purpose overall. What are some examples that you've seen of clarity or ambiguity in workplaces? scrolling through the chat and what we had when we were talking before about communication. Folks did share some things that I'd like to make sure we don't lose. Taking responsibility for miscommunication. Our group makes really good use of Teams and email to communicate. We have active Teams group chats, so we can talk about work-related questions, but also have a digital space to connect, share memes. I'm pretty sure memes are one of my new love language. Memes and TikToks convey everything better than I ever could with words. All right, so clarity, lack of consistency, absolutely. With lack of consistency with policy. And I would add to that lack of enforcement. So policy says one thing, practice says another. I think most of us have been in those situations where you go, especially on a new team or in a new position, and the person training you is like, yeah, that's the policy. But what we actually do is, or how it really works is XYZ. And that can be because the policy isn't effective or logical, often because it was created without input from those responsible, or because folks are not mindful of the policy and do it how they want to. So it can be either or. Either like the policy doesn't make sense, or folks don't agree with it for whatever reason and decided to do it a different way, and that became the normal practice. A boss who will only give verbal orders or instructions, so there's no record of what was said and when. Yeah, so again, that consistent messaging, clear messaging. Thank you for sharing. Right, and finally, our last characteristic of bad practices in teams is working in silos. So this is an every man for themselves mentality. There's a lot of possessiveness over your work. This is mine. This is my area of expertise. Stay out of it. And you, similar to the clarity, you don't know what other teams are doing. There's a lot of competition and bad blood kind of competition, not friendly. And then there are a lot of barriers between people, between projects, between teams. So everybody is in their own world, regardless of what would make more sense from an efficiency perspective or better work quality. Everybody stays in their own lane. The supervisors often promote these kind of silos, supervisors of these teams, because of the power it provides them. They're the ones with the information and the knowledge of what other people are doing, promoting that division and separation. And our example here, if you've seen the movie Working Girl, which I think was in the late 80s, Catherine Parker was a supervisor and takes her new assistant under her wing and is extremely supportive, and then steals her idea and tries to throw her under the bus when things get rocky. So it's that possessiveness over work and creating separation. And again, taking credit for others' work, creating barriers, like I said, for power, or for there are probably other reasons as well, but really wanting to maintain that separation, which prevents people from doing the best work they can, and creating great products among themselves. Our final story, and this one is my favorite of them maybe, and just to prove that that bosses aren't the only ones that get it right. This is an employee who got it wrong. Last summer, I decided to re-enter the workforce after 5 years of raising my kids. I applied to a bunch of jobs that I thought I could do and got an interview at this one very small company, about 20 employees. The people I interviewed with were my future manager and her boss, the COO. They were upfront with me that I didn't possess the exact qualifications they were looking for, but I interviewed well, and they decided to give me a few one-off assignments to see if I would be able to learn what I needed to for the job. I proved myself, and they brought me on full time. I spent the first 4 months at that company doing a lot of learning on my own. My manager, let's call her Betty, wasn't very involved with my training at all, always claiming she had tons of work to do. Instead, she gave me lists of resources, things like training manuals, online certifications, etc., that I could go through, and she checked in on me maybe once a day. She also assigned me a starter project to learn on the job. So I basically taught myself everything I needed to learn, and the project I worked on was a huge success. It launched about 5 months after I was hired. I got a raise out of it, and everyone in management was very happy with my work. Once I had finished that project and the account I launched was doing well, I noticed that some of the skills and tactics I'd used could be implemented on another account that wasn't performing well, as performing as well as the one I had just launched. So I told Betty about my plan, and she completely blew me off. Basically, she told me she already had plans for this account and she didn't need my help, and instead assigned me to another less important project. I was more than a little insulted by her attitude, but I know sometimes you have to push hard to get things done. I calmed myself down and waited until the next day when Betty left for vacation. I went to Betty's boss, Veronica, and I walked her through the improvements I wanted to make on this account, and was given the green light to go ahead and start that work. Clearly, this was the right thing to do. Veronica wouldn't have given me the go-ahead otherwise, right? Well, Betty returned from her vacation on a Friday a few weeks later. I came in that Monday morning and found that she had sabotaged all my work over the weekend. She went through everything I'd worked on that had already launched and made a bunch of changes, took down some stuff, and more. Essentially, she did everything she could so I wouldn't be able to show the improvements I'd made to the suffering account. And it was reverted to how it was performing in the past. She also sent me a very passive-aggressive email along the lines of, "We'll talk about this on Monday." In order to preempt another hissy fit from her, and once I assessed the gravity of what she had done, I went into the meeting with Betty and pulled Veronica into the conference room as well. I proceeded to explain to Betty that this project had been assigned to me by Veronica, and she had no business interfering with my work. I was very clear that what she had done was unprofessional, extremely disrespectful, that the results I produced were speaking for themselves, and that she shouldn't meddle in things that don't concern her. Of course, I was very angry, and maybe I was a little forceful during that meeting, but I felt like I had every right to be upset at what she did. Betty was very quiet during the meeting. At the time, I couldn't figure it out. I figured she just couldn't think of how to defend her actions. Now I understand it's because she's even more conniving than I thought she was. The next morning, I was called to sit down with Veronica and the CEO. They told me things weren't working out, gave me a severance check, and told me I was laid off. I feel I was treated extremely unfairly. I had a clearly incompetent manager. I never received proper training. And when I tried to help by taking on more important projects, my work was sabotaged and I was punished for my initiative. I think Betty may even have spread harsh rumors about me in the industry, because despite applying to a bunch of jobs, I've had very few interviews, and the ones I've had never went past the references stage. So lots to unpack there, but that idea of I know everything, I know better than others, and stepping on each other's toes in an unhealthy way, and a rookie mistake. And again, a very extreme example, but that perspective of being very protective of your work and of your knowledge, and assuming that you know what's right, in this case over your boss, and we'll disregard the cunning of behind that, of going behind her back while she was on vacation, and then talking about the work assignments. But yeah, just that idea that you know what's best and you're always in the right. Versus in a high-performing team, they are highly collaborative. Everyone is working towards that shared goal. They understand each other's expertise and talent. So so they know that if they don't know something, they can rely on others, or they can get their input, and recognizing that others might have better information or different ideas or know this better than they do. And being able to understand and respect that for the good of the work versus their own pride getting in the way. How have you seen this done well? Good collaboration stories? While you're thinking, to brag on my own team, which Zane and Sai are both a part of, we work very well together and are really good at talking about our different talents and skills, to know who's going to be a really good fit to work together, because of often our different working styles, and also a good fit for the kind of work that we're doing, which in the end gives us a lot of different perspective to create great projects, to do good work for our partners. Sai agrees with me, so you know I'm not. Other ways that you have seen this work well, giving others time to explain their ideas instead of shutting them down. Yeah, encouraging them. I work with a few professionals who willingly allow their staff who are specialized in different areas to provide assistance in those areas to myself and others. I rely on the people who know, and getting that experience among different teams. Please do keep sharing. So just to kind of recap what we've talked about, common things that you see in low performing teams versus high performing teams. Again, in a lot of ways, these are opposites of each other. So low performing teams, there's a lack of communication, a lack of information sharing, a lot of ambiguity. Things are not clear about roles, responsibilities, directions from leadership aren't clear or well explained. They don't necessarily trust each other or have good relationships. So there's not that support to grow and do better work together or improve how you are operating. Because it's not just about the work product, but it's about that relationship as a team and being able to work together, and have a good work experience. Good work experiences lead to better performances. And working in silos, so protective of work, not paying attention to anything else that's going on around you, but only the things that you're working on or doing on your own. Flip side, in high performing teams, and I did a lot of research reading characteristics about these teams, and these were the things that came up over and over and over again, where that over communication, really wanting to make sure everyone has what they need to succeed. There's clarity about roles, there's understanding about why decisions are made, lines of authority where necessary, trust among each other to do their job, do it well, trusting leadership in the decisions that they're making, and collaboration, working together for that same shared result. And I want to reinforce that these things are entirely circular. If I don't trust you, I'm not going to let you touch my work. I'm not going to tell you what's going on. If my, if instructions aren't clear, or I don't understand why a decision is made, then we're probably not going to respect and listen to that. And so performance is going to be sabotaged essentially because I don't trust you. So I don't want to talk to you about issues that I'm having. So staff aren't going to grow because they don't want to talk about what's happening. If I do trust you, if we do have a good relationship, if I'm getting clear and clear expectations, understand why decisions are made, if I'm involved in the decision-making process, then I'm going to be willing to talk to you and try when things aren't going well, or when I need help, or reach out to others just for support to help, because I know that they have expertise and they're going to understand that that I need them, or that it's not that I'm bad at my job. I just need a little help, and they're the right person. They understand. So, so where they are circular, where out of the floor areas should someone start to move a team from low performing to high performing? That is a really great question. And I always start with trust and relationships. And that's really hard. Trust is hard won and easily broken. But if you start with rebuilding relationships and trust, transparency about what's going on and what you're hoping to achieve, then that is the really great starting point to making change for the rest of the team. And also builds that buy-in and support from the team. Acknowledging mistakes and trying to move forward. They're going to trust that your efforts are genuine. If you just start making changes and say you're doing things and it's not that you're going to improve, isn't going to matter if I don't trust your intentions. What would have been a better layout of the scenario presented, or do you believe that there was any hope to make it better? Rebecca, which scenario do you mean? The last one? And if the last one, because that one's fresh on my mind, I think it comes down to you shared your ideas, and that employee was not willing to hear no because they firmly believed that they were wrong. So maybe some coaching around taking feedback and respecting the ideas of others. Especially but often, the supervisor or person that's been there longer has more information about why things should not change. I'm not saying that the supervisor necessarily was in the right. The employees' ideas could have been wonderful, but the way that they went about implementing them was entirely wrong to ever get respect from her peers, to ever be trusted with projects, because she went behind other people's backs and sabotaged the project as a whole. We are just about out of time. So thank you, Rebecca. I will hand things back over to Zane to close us out. So thank you all for spending a little bit of your day with me and hopefully having some fun. And I will drop the rest of those links into those articles in the chat if you want to read the whole thing.
Thank you, Carrie. I just put a link in chat that takes you to our evaluation, and we would appreciate your feedback. It's a pretty short evaluation that shouldn't take you too much time to fill out. This lets us know how we're doing, and we're always looking for ways to improve our workshops to be more effective and engaging. There's also a spot in the evaluation that you can write in to tell us what topics or workshops you're interested in that would be relevant to your work that you'd want to come back to see. And we build our workshops based off of what we hear from you. So in previous surveys, we heard that collaboration and teamwork would be something you would be interested in learning about. And that's how we were informed to build this workshop. So when we get ready to do Rising to the Challenge again in the fall, we'll take a look at the input that we receive from you. We'll pick another theme and we'll do 5 to 6 more workshops. So anything that you want to see, please drop it in the evaluation, and that's where we will get to see it and hopefully build it for you. This was our 4th workshop of the series. Next week, Cy Rogers, who is in this meeting with us right now, is going to be talking to us about going far together. I really hope that you can make it. If you're not able to make the workshop, we're going to be putting these on our YouTube, and you can go back and revisit them or share them with your team. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a great lunch hour, and we look forward to seeing you next week.